Some betrayals happen in an instant, a drunken mistake, a lapse in judgment, a single moment of weakness. Others are slow, calculated, and deliberate. My wife's betrayal was the second kind. She had years to stop herself, years to tell me the truth, years to make a different choice. But she didn't. And by the time I found out, it was too late to undo the damage. Emma and I had been married for 7 years. When we met, we clicked instantly. Same taste in movies, same sarcastic humor, same love for lazy Sunday mornings spent drinking coffee in bed. But there was one thing we never agreed on. Kids that I never wanted them. Ever since I was young, I knew that life wasn't for me. I wasn't interested in being a father. I didn't want the responsibility, the financial burden, the permanent shift in my life. I wanted to travel, to enjoy my freedom, to build a life with a woman who wanted the same. Emma told me she understood. When we were dating, I brought it up early. I wasn't about to waste my time, or hers, if we had different goals. I remember sitting across from her at dinner, watching her stir her drink with her straw, waiting for her answer. She had smiled. I love kids, but I love you more. If you don't want them, then I don't need them. I believed her. For years, things were good. We were that couple, laughing, teasing, sharing inside jokes that no one else understood. We traveled to Greece, explored the streets of Italy, hiked through rainforests in Costa Rica. We lived the kind of life people dream about. But then, things started to change. It was subtle at first. She'd linger a little too long when we visited friends who had kids. She started following mom bloggers on Instagram. When we walked past the baby aisle in Target, she'd pause, looking at tiny shoes with a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Then came the comments. Look how cute they are, she'd say, watching a toddler giggle in a restaurant. You'd be such a great dad. She'd tell me out of nowhere. You never know. You might change your mind one day. I didn't change my mind. And every time she brought it up, I reminded her. Emma, we talked about this. I don't want kids. That's not changing. She would nod, force a smile, and say, I know. But she wasn't accepting it. She was waiting. For what? I don't know. Maybe she thought I'd wake up one day with a sudden desire to be a father. Maybe she thought love would change me. Maybe she thought if she pushed enough, I'd cave. I didn't. And that's when she made her decision. Things between us started feeling off. She was distant, distracted. She'd go out more often with friends, but she never mentioned who. She started guarding her phone, turning it away from me when she got messages. I wasn't the jealous type, and I trusted her. But deep down, something felt wrong. Then, one night, she came home late. It was almost midnight. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but really, I was waiting. She walked in, her hair slightly messy, her lipstick smudged. And I knew, I just knew. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't accuse her. I just watched her walk into the bedroom, avoiding my gaze, and I felt something inside me crack. The next few weeks, it got worse. She was emotionally checked out, barely present. When I touched her, she flinched. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd snap, saying she was just stressed. Then, one evening, she sat me down at the kitchen table. I have to tell you something, she said, her voice shaking. I already knew. I just didn't know how bad it was. She took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. The world slowed. My ears started ringing. I felt my stomach drop. But even in that moment, I already knew the answer to my next question. Whose is it? I asked, my voice eerily calm. She swallowed hard. His name was Mark. Some guy from work. Someone who did want kids. Someone who gave her what I wouldn't. I stared at her, my mind spinning. So, what? I asked. You decided that if I wouldn't give you a baby, you'd just go out and get one from someone else? She flinched. It wasn't like that, wasn't it? I cut her off. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I wanted a baby so badly. And I thought maybe if you saw the baby, you'd change your mind. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a plan, and I pushed back my chair, standing up slowly. So that's what this was? A test? A gamble? You threw our marriage away because you thought a baby would make me stay? She sobbed. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, but it did. Silenced, I clenched my fists, trying to contain the rage boiling inside me. You knew how I felt. You knew. And instead of respecting it, you did this. You didn't just cheat on me. You made a whole human being to manipulate me. She shook her head violently. No, it wasn't manipulation. I laughed bitterly. Oh, so you just happened to have unprotected sex with another man and get pregnant by accident? Is that supposed to make me feel better? She didn't answer. I exhaled slowly. Pack your things. Her head snapped up. What? You're leaving, I said coldly. Her face crumpled. Please, don't do this. I made a mistake, but I still love you. I stared at her for a long moment. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, and now she was nothing to me. No, Emma, I said, my voice firm. You don't do this to someone you love. Tears streamed down her face. I don't want to lose you. I shook my head. You already did. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her to deal with the wreckage of her own choices. I walked out of that kitchen feeling like my entire world had been set on fire. The life I thought I had, the marriage I had built, was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. Emma hadn't just cheated. She hadn't just broken my trust. She had planned this. She had deliberately destroyed everything we had, believing that somehow I'd still be there on the other side. She gambled with our marriage. And she lost. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and walked out the front door without another word. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to be anywhere but there. The night air was cold, but it did nothing to cool the rage burning inside me. My mind kept replaying our conversation, her teary confession, her excuses, her pathetic attempts to justify the unjustifiable. I thought maybe if you saw the baby, you'd change your mind. Those words made me sick. This wasn't some drunken mistake she regretted the next morning. This was premeditated betrayal. She made a conscious decision to go outside our marriage, sleep with another man, and get pregnant. On purpose. All because she wanted something I wouldn't give her. I got in my car and drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head, but it was impossible. I couldn't escape the image of her sitting there at the kitchen table, her hands shaking, knowing what she had done and still hoping I would accept it, like I was supposed to just get over it, like I was supposed to raise another man's child, like I was supposed to forgive her. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't deserve this. I had never lied to her. I had never led her on. I told her from the very beginning that I didn't want kids. If that was a deal breaker, she could have walked away before we ever got serious. But she didn't. She stayed. She married me. She promised she was okay with it. And then she did this. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot and just sat there, staring at the city lights in the distance. My mind was racing, my chest felt tight, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. Everything inside me was screaming that this was over, that there was nothing left to salvage. But divorce wasn't just a word. It was a process, a long, messy, painful process. And as much as I wanted to walk away clean, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. I didn't go home that night. I drove to my brother's place instead. He opened the door, took one look at me, and knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked. I stepped inside, sat down on his couch, and stared at the floor. She's pregnant, I said flatly, his brow furrowed. I thought you. It's not mine. Silence. Then, his expression darkened. You're kidding. I let out a bitter laugh. I wish. He sat across from me, hands clasped. Tell me everything. So I did that. I told him how she had been acting distant, how I had suspected something was off, and how she finally sat me down and dropped the bomb. I told him about Mark, the man she had chosen to replace me, and how she had done it all knowing exactly how I felt. By the time I finished, my brother looked like he wanted to put his fist through a wall. That's some next-level betrayal, he muttered. She didn't just cheat, man. She went out and built a whole new family behind your back. I nodded, rubbing my face. Yeah. So what now? I exhaled slowly. Divorce. That word felt heavy. Final. But there was no alternative. You sure? He asked. I shot him a look. You think I'm gonna stay with her after this? No, he admitted. I just know it's gonna be messy. He wasn't wrong. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and ice-cold reality sinking in. Divorce wasn't just about leaving. It was about dividing the house, the assets, the finances. We had built a life together, and now I had to untangle myself from it. But I was ready. By the end of the week, I had papers drawn up. No fault divorce. Clean break. No alimony. No unnecessary complications. I didn't owe her a thing. I walked back into that house one last time to serve them to her. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red, her face was pale, and she had clearly spent the last few days crying. When she saw the papers in my hand, fresh tears welled up in her eyes. Please, she whispered. Can't we talk about this? There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice firm. You made your choice, Emma. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I made a mistake, she choked. A huge, terrible mistake. But I still love you. I shook my head. No, you don't. Her breath hitched. I do? No. I cut her off. You loved the idea of me. The version of me you thought you could change. But you never actually loved me for who I was. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done this. She covered her mouth, sobbing. I just wanted a family. I clenched my jaw. Then you should have married someone who wanted the same thing. Silence. She stared at the papers in my hands, her entire body shaking. So that's it? I sighed. What else is there? She swallowed hard. I don't want to do this alone. I let out a bitter laugh. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you got pregnant with another man's baby. She broke down completely, sobbing, shaking, falling apart. I didn't care. I placed the papers on the counter, turned, and walked out the door. For the last time. Walking out of that house for the last time should have felt liberating. It should have felt like the final nail in the coffin of a marriage that had already been dead the moment she let another man touch her. But instead, all I felt was exhaustion. Not sadness. Not regret. Just sheer, bone-deep exhaustion. Emma had spent years lying to me, pretending she was fine with our agreement, pretending she had made peace with my decision. And the whole time, she had been playing a long game, waiting for me to change, planning how to get what she wanted. And when waiting wasn't enough, she took matters into her own hands. I drove back to my brother's place and collapsed onto his couch. He didn't ask any questions. He just handed me a beer and sat down beside me. She signed? He asked. I let out a heavy breath. Not yet. She will. I nodded. I wasn't worried about that. She didn't have a choice. The next few weeks were quieter than I expected. I thought she'd blow up my phone. I thought she'd beg, cry, scream at me to come back. But she didn't. She went silent. Part of me hoped she had finally accepted that this was over, that she had finally realized that her plan had failed. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, almost let it go to voicemail. But at the last second, I answered, "Hello?" A woman's voice came through the line. Not Emma. Hi, is this, I don't know if I should be calling you, but my name is Leah. I'm Mark's wife. My stomach dropped and I sat up straight. Mark? As in, yes. She took a shaky breath. I think we need to talk. We met at a small cafe. She looked just as wrecked as I felt. Dark circles under her eyes, fingers twisting the wedding ring on her hand. I don't even know where to start, she admitted, staring down at her coffee. How about how you found out? I asked. She let out a humorless laugh. Emma told me. I blinked. Emma? She showed up at my house, Leah said, shaking her head. I thought she was a friend of Mark's at first. She looked desperate, like she had nowhere else to turn. I gritted my teeth. And she told me everything. Leah's voice wavered. She told me she was pregnant with my husband's child and that he had abandoned her, that he refused to help, that he left her all alone. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my anger in check. She thought I'd convince him to come back, Leah said bitterly, that I'd somehow force him to take responsibility. My hands curled into fists under the table. Emma had no shame. It wasn't enough that she had betrayed me. She had to go and destroy someone else's marriage too. Leah wiped at her eyes. I confronted Mark. He didn't deny it. He just packed a bag and left. Just like that. No remorse. No guilt. Where is he now? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know. I don't care. I just wanted you to know. I stared at her. Why? She let out a shaky breath. Because you deserved better. I laughed bitterly. So did you. She nodded. Yeah. Silence settled between us. A mutual understanding. Two people whose lives had been shattered by the same betrayal. After a few moments, Leah pulled something from her bag and slid it across the table. I picked it up. Divorce papers. I already filed mine, she said. I figured you might want to see that you're not alone in this. I nodded slowly. Thanks. She stood up, gave me a small, sad smile, and walked away. And just like that, I realized something. Emma and Mark had both lost. They thought they could make a mess of our lives and come out the other side together. But in the end, they both got exactly what they deserved. Nothing. That evening, I went back to the house one last time. Emma was still living there, for now, but once the divorce was finalized, it would be sold, and we'd go our separate ways. I knocked. She answered the door, looking more exhausted than ever. I spoke to Leah, I said, getting straight to the point. Her face went pale. I cut her off. I know you went to her. I know you tried to drag her into this mess. She swallowed hard. I didn't know what else to do. I shook my head. You don't get to play the victim, Emma. You did this to yourself. Her lower lip trembled. I didn't mean for. Stop. My voice was sharp. I don't care. I'm done listening to excuses. She stared at me, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the finalized divorce papers. Sign them. She hesitated. Please, Emma. My voice was low, final. You're alone now. Mark isn't coming back, and I'm never going to forgive you. She flinched, her shoulders slumping in defeat. With shaking hands, she took the pen, pressed it to the paper, and signed her name. The final nail in the coffin. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. What am I supposed to do now? I held her gaze, feeling nothing. No sympathy. No sadness. Just freedom. Live with the consequences, I said simply. Then, I turned and walked away. This time, for good. Walking away from that house for the last time felt different. It wasn't just leaving a home. It was leaving her. Leaving the wreckage of everything she had done. Leaving the pain, the betrayal, the anger behind. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Emma had signed the papers. There was no going back. The divorce was now a matter of time. a process that would run its course, and once it was finalized, I'd be free. She had lost everything. Me, Mark, our life together, and now she had to face that reality alone. Days passed, then weeks. I didn't hear from her. I moved out of my brother's place and into a small apartment across town. A fresh start. Nothing fancy, just a place that was mine. Then, one night, I got one last message from her. Not a phone call, not a long-winded apology, just a short, simple text. I had the baby today. He's healthy. I thought you should know. I stared at the screen for a long time. I felt nothing. Not curiosity, not sadness, not guilt. That baby was not mine. He never was, never would be. He was a product of betrayal, of a choice that Emma had made knowing what it would cost. I didn't reply and I deleted the message. And that was the last time I ever heard from her. The divorce went through a few months later. I signed the final paperwork in my lawyer's office, handed it over, and just like that, it was done. 7 years of marriage, wiped away with a few signatures, and no fanfare. No grand confrontation. Just a quiet ending to a story that had gone up in flames. I never saw her again. I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling. That being a single mother wasn't the dream she thought it would be. That Mark had completely disappeared. No financial support, no visits, nothing. She had built a fantasy in her head, convinced herself that if she just went through with it, everything would fall into place. Instead, she ended up alone. I should have felt bad that I didn't. She made her choice. She traded our marriage for a child with another man. She thought she could have it all, me, him, a family. But life doesn't work that way. Actions have consequences, and in the end, she lost everything. It took time, but I moved on. I started focusing on myself, work, hobbies, new experiences. I traveled again, this time alone. At first, it was strange, but eventually, I started enjoying it. For the first time in years, I wasn't compromising for someone else, I was living for me. And the best part, I never regretted a thing. I didn't regret leaving. I didn't regret refusing to forgive her. I didn't regret refusing to raise a child that wasn't mine. Emma had tried to force me into a life I never wanted. But in the end, all she did was set me free, and I was never looking back. Ever.